Welcome back to the Prepare Like a Pro podcast. This week on the show, we have John Quinn, a widely respected leader in the elite coaching field with experience across a diverse range of sports. John's career has spanned over more than 30 years. He has worked with many Australians, leading athletes and coaches across sports such as track and field, swimming, AFL, rugby league, tennis, cricket, bobsleigh and soccer. Just a few of John's accomplishments include sprint and relay coach for the Australian track and field team at the 2000 Sydney Olympics, head conditioning coach and high performance manager at the Essendon Football Club from 1998 to 2008, Australian fitness coach for 2 international rules series in the Australian Island. He was the high performance manager of the Greater and Western Sydney Giants from 2010 to 2014. Academy Director as well at the GWS Giants from 2015, and the Director of the QESS Exercise Physiology Services both in Sydney and Melbourne. Before we start episode 40, the Prepare Like a Pro podcast mission is to empower aspiring athletes and staff while strengthening the AFL community by providing practical knowledge from some of the industry's most inspiring individuals. If you like the show, please support us by following us on Instagram and subscribe to our podcast. We're on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. I can see John's joined us, so I'm going to send the invite over to you. Here we go. John's on. Hey, mate.
G'day. Oh, look, technology is great, isn't it, when it works?
How good's this?
Very good. I'm glad it's working. I was worried it was never going to work.
We didn't even do a trial run, mate. We just
rolled
on and got it done.
Mate, I've just walked in the door from training, so it's perfect timing.
Oh, well done. Where have you come from? Who are you training?
I've got my squad. I've got a sprint squad here in Sydney. So Bendiria Boyer is my leading athlete. She's a 400-metre runner. And then I've got a number of sprinters, 200-metre runners mainly.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, so all good. Yes.
Well, let's dive into it, mate. Take us back to the beginning, John. At what age did you recognise you had a passion for health and fitness?
Oh, look, I grew up in country New South Wales, and when you grow up in the country, it's probably not that much different in the city, to be honest. I think as Australians, we're all pretty active, and it's just part of the culture. I started to tell you that I grew up in a country town about half an hour outside of Canberra called Yass, and in that town, you could only really play rugby league in the winter, and in the summer you played cricket, and that was about it. You could do a bit of swimming. So that was really my key sports as a young kid growing up. And I ended up not only playing rugby league, but I refereed rugby league. I did a 3-year stint refereeing in the Canberra district. I also coached a junior team, and it was through coaching that junior team that I actually discovered myself coaching athletes. And I was only 17 years of age, so I was still at school. And I was running myself, but I started coaching. So I'm 56 now, so I'm really looking down the barrel of a 40-year coaching career at the moment. Very fun.
Yeah. So 17 years old, you started coaching a rugby, what was it, an under-18 team?
No. I'd been coaching a junior rugby league team, and there was a young boy in the team that was particularly fast, and his father, they lived on the property, and his father came in to pick up his son. And I said to him, Dean's a very good runner. You should consider getting him some coaching for sprinting. And he went, "Oh, you think so?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely." He goes, "Oh, when do you want me to bring him in?" And that's how I became an athletics coach. And that one grew to 2, grew to 5, grew to 10. And I met a new arrival in town. It was actually the local butcher who'd come to Yass, and he was right into his professional running. And he was very enthusiastic. And together we set up the Yass Athletics Club back in about 1982 or 1983. And it became we had 85 members, and it was quite big, and I had no idea what we were doing. We were just having fun, and we were travelling around New South Wales and going off to country championships, and these kids were going seriously well. We had athletes going off to World Junior Championships and making national finals and so on, and it was all just good fun. And I was working at the time. I'd left school now, and I was working at the local hospital, but I think I spent as much time actually running the athletics club by, newsletters, publishing newsletters and organising meetings and fundraisers and trips into Albury and Wagga in Sydney. And I got a tap on the shoulder from an organisation called Little Athletics New South Wales. And they asked me if I'd like to be their education development officer. And I moved to Sydney. I was at the ripe old age of 20 and became the education development officer for Little Athletics. And my job was to travel far and wide in New South Wales. I used to do about 140,000 kilometres a year, going into schools, trying to get kids to join athletics, getting local communities behind athletics, setting up clubs, running clinics, seminars, workshops. I worked School of the Air, any type of school in New South Wales. I've pretty much been there, I reckon. And that's really how my coaching started, because I had to communicate with large groups and setting up clubs with organisations. And whilst I was doing all that travelling, I was coaching a group of athletes here in Sydney, juniors, but they were going pretty well. And I was obviously getting a bit of notice because I became involved with the national program as one of the national junior event coaches. And my career just sort of kept going from there, really.
Fantastic. Yeah, you can see you have a passion for it. You mentioned the fun and how it just grew the numbers, the power of the people, by the sounds of it. Is the athletics club still going?
Yes, it's still going. And yes, I still have a little bit to do with it. Not as much as I'd probably like to be honest. But no, it's still going, and they're still producing some good athletes coming out. It's not bad for a small town, but it showed me from the very outset what you can do with just a group of enthusiastic people that are motivated, and you're there for the right reason. And the reason is to provide an activity for, we're mainly kids. Adults got into it as well, but athletics is a great sport. It's for everyone. And for me, it was a hobby that just got out of control. And I've never really worked a day in my life. I just love what I do. And athletics has underpinned every role that I've ever had in whether it be in sport or sports science or medicine. The athletics has underpinned everything.
Yeah, fantastic. And then how did that get you from working in the athletics world and building a name there to then working in team sports like the AFL?
Well, no, it's a bit of serendipity, I think, because I was working at Little Athletics, and I knew that if I wanted to have a career coaching-wise mainly athletics, I was thinking, I would need to get qualified. And there was a degree came up, first time ever, in coaching. It was sports coaching, and it had this little attachment on it, sports coaching and exercise physiology at the Uni of New South Wales. So I did that, and Little A's allowed me to just work around the schedule of university. So I was working, but I was a student. So I did my sports science degree, and by the time I'd finished, I was asked by the AIS if I would be interested in working for the AIS, and they were just starting a decentralisation program, and I was offered the choice. I could either go to Townsville and set up like a satellite program outside of Brisbane for the Queensland Academy of Sport, or I could go to Tasmania and set up the first ever institute for track and field in Tasmania. So being the control freak that I am and was at 26, I decided I'd go to Tasmania. So I'm down in Tasmania and I'm running the program down there, which has really only got 4 key programs in it: rowing, cycling, hockey, and track and field. And all the other sports would feed into it. So if an athlete was playing tennis, for example, and they needed speed, well, they could only come to the track and field coach. So I was teaching all of these different sports how to run or move or recover or whatever. AFL is the number one sport in Tasmania. I'd never seen a game of AFL, and I had no interest in AFL, to be quite honest, but it was everywhere. And the Institute had a program for up and coming AFL players, and they were sent to me for strength, conditioning, rehab, speed, agility, nutrition, whatever. And I was just advising these young enthusiastic boys what they needed to do. And then they'd contact me and say, "Oh, thank you for so much. You know, I've been drafted. I'm going to go to Melbourne Football Club, or I'm going off to Adelaide or whatever." And I'd just, "Oh, that's fantastic." And it was just incredible the way things happened, where I was approached to actually initially to go to Geelong, and it was to be the head of performance at Geelong. And I knew the guy who was Gary Davidson, who was the boss at Geelong at the time. Well, some listeners may know that Gary Davidson is from Tasmania, and I worked with his son to get his son fit and ready for the AFL proper. And Gary asked me, would I be interested in coming to Geelong? And that's how that came. And I can still remember Gary ringing me and saying, oh, look, I'm sorry, mate, but look, we've been able to attract one of the best in the business. And he was talking about Loris Bertolacci. So Loris Bertolacci moved on to Geelong and left Essendon. And lo and behold, I get this phone call left of centre from Essendon Football Club. And within a couple of weeks, I find myself, I've moved. And it was just the perfect timing. And I was really moving to Melbourne to get into a bigger city where I could coach track and field. Football was just the means to an end. I'd still, by the time I started at Essendon, I'd still not seen a game of AFL at any level.
That's amazing. Yeah.
So, and I ended up at one of the biggest clubs in the land, and it changed my life forever.
And so did you start managing the conditioning at Essendon, did you? And then work your way up to high performance manager?
Well, in those days, we weren't called high performance managers. They're just names to make you sound more important than what you really are. When I got there, I was the head of fitness, and it was basically, it's the same job as a high performance manager. So I was the head of fitness there, and I know that my first meeting there was with my assistant, and he's quite well known in the circles of AFL. His name was Andrew Russell, and Andrew was very, very concerned. We had our first meeting in the if anyone's been to Windy Hill, they'd know the cafe next door. And we went into the cafe, and I said, right, and I got a serviette out, and I said, just draw the field on there, and you tell me where the different positions are and what their key roles actually are. And he looked at me and said, are you serious? And I said, yeah, I better get to know what they do. And so, look,
you must have learned quick.
Well, in some ways, yes. But it was actually a blessing in disguise, because I came into the game with no preconceived ideas, and I just backed my own judgment. I followed the game once I got in there. I started looking at what was going on and worked in with the coaches. But I did what I do with a track athlete that comes to me. They might be, for example, a 400-metre runner, but what's the individual strengths of that person that I'm coaching? And I'm coaching people, not a footballer, not an athlete, not a cricketer. I'm coaching a person. What is it that I have to do to bring out the best in that person to allow them to perform to their highest level? And so at Essendon, I just went through players I'd never heard of. One, for example, was James Hurd. He was a superstar in the game. I'd never really even heard of James Hurd. And we started talking about, when I got there, he had an injury. And the injury was a very common symptom. But if you had it, you basically didn't recover from it. And my whole thing with Hurdy was to guide him and get his strength stuff. And ultimately, we got an operation done, and it was a surgery, but it was also coming at the whole game with a different perspective. And I had a different perspective to the game of AFL. It was like 400-metre runners. It was long, explosive, repetitive work that went for 2 hours, and they had to be super fit, have a great base of conditioning under that, but they had to also be able to repeat with speed and explosivity over and over and over again. And I was able to drill that into them, and Kevin Sheedy gave me full license to do that because he's got a great love for track. And he gave me full license to do that. And I think our two, well, we're both eccentric characters, let's face it. Sheeds is far more eccentric than me, but we're both loonies. And I think we just got on like a house on fire, and he let me run my program, and it clicked. Yeah, it was great.
And so it sounds like the relationship clicked quite naturally, but was that an intention in yours? Like, is track and field, when you're the conditioning coach for a track and field athlete, what's your team look like compared to a football club? Is it just you with the athlete, or you've got a whole team?
You had a whole team to do everything. The only support we sort of got in track and field, when we'd be always trying to drum it up, was for media. But I was well trained for that with the Tasmanian Institute of Sport, because track and field was is a high profile sport in Tasmania. And as the head coach of track and field in Tasmania, I had to drive a lot of that profile that they needed. So that side of it, I could really adapt quite easily to. But it was just the whole world of football was just so unique and different. But I don't take myself too seriously. I think I'm there to get the most out of people. And regardless of the sport, you look at what the needs of the individual are and how can I make you better, not how can I make you better to make me look good? It's what do you need? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? What have we got to work with? And let's go for it.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, so it's focusing on bettering the person in front of you, which if you're a coach at 17 years old working on your craft, I imagine you become quite selfless pretty early on.
Well, you're there. You understand that you're a coach, and that was my role and my job. And when I went into AFL, it was like, well, what are the needs of the game? What are the physiological demands going on in the player? What's required here? And I didn't have any of the preconceived ideas. I can still remember Sheed saying to me in the very first couple of months, shouldn't we be doing long running? More like 10K runs and things. And look, to his great credit, he backed me in, and I got the players' fitness doing things that were quite different in those times. From we were doing low gradient hills, massive explosive reps on the hills with a jog back recovery. And we were doing different type of weights. We were doing contrast weights with lots of plyometrics. And one of the first things I did at the old Windy Hill was put in a synthetic track indoors. So we do things like, they hadn't done things like power cleans much. So they were doing power cleans in the gym and then going up onto the indoor track and doing explosive runs and crashing in almost like world indoors into a crash mat at the end of the runway. And the players adapted to it really well. The players took me on, and I had an instant rapport with the players, and it was just one of openness and honesty. You don't bullshit players. They can smell that a mile off. This is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is what you're going to get for it. And the players all bought into it. And that relationship got stronger and stronger as the years went by.
Yeah, that's it's pretty cool to hear that the coach bought into and trusted someone that's, like you said, was quite raw to the game.
I think Sheed's actually quite liked that aspect of it. And he, when he was a player himself, he'd gone off and done some running training. He got a coach to teach him how to run properly, and that improved his game. So the fact that I had the running background, he really resonated with that. And not that he's ever really said it, but I think I'd spent years, I'd been at university and done a degree in coaching, and I'd been coaching track and field since I was 17. So here I am now in Tasmania, in Melbourne, and I'm, hitting 30. I'd been coaching for a long time. So I was actually, forget, whether I'm into AFL or whether I'm into athletics or whatever I'm into. At the end of the day, I'm a coach, and I was there to bring the best out in people to coach the person. And I think Sheeds could see that. So I was there, and I became just one of his coaching staff that happened to be in charge of fitness and their recovery and getting them up for the next game.
And how about game day role? Was it common back then for the conditioning fitness guys to be involved on game day? And if that were the case,
again, I probably took liberties that were different, and I didn't see them as taking liberties. I just saw this is something you need to do. For example, the players used to come off the ground and just sit on the bench. I could not work that out one bit. I mean, if I had an athlete, say a 400 metre runner, and I think AFL players are, in a track and field sense, they're akin to a cross between a 400 and 800 metre runner on the track. So there's high levels of lactate when they do training and play the game. So the last thing I'd do with my 400 metre runner after they've done a high effort repetition on the track is sit down on the ground where the lactate can pull. So I would move them. So I remember at the time it caused a bit of a stir, and they had to actually get clarification that it was okay to do it. The players would come from the ground, and I'd take them for a walk along the boundary line, and we'd walk up and come back, and then I'd have them doing activation work in between. So they'd do activation sprints. It caused such a stir in 99, 2000. I know it used to make a part of the game discussion. Look at the Essendon players. They're doing all this. They're doing a session while they're actually playing the game. For me, there's no session. It was keeping them in peak form. And, now that's commonplace. People wouldn't even think of that. The other thing that was common sense to me was this whole thing about nutrition and hydration. And I did a postgrad course I did it in science, but I majored in occupational health. And all of my examples of occupation were to do with full-time coaching of sport. And I honed it in on football. And I really went further and looked at hydration and how does hydration impact on your training. And if you're, for example, 1% dehydrated, and if anyone's listening to this now and you're thinking, well, I'm not dehydrated, thirst is not an indicator of hydration status. So half the time people are saying, oh, I'm hydrated, but they're not. You've only got to be 1% dehydrated. That starts to impact on your ability to make decisions under pressure, and on it goes. And as you go, 3% is really debilitating in a sport like AFL. So we got very big on doing things like weighing our players before and after games, hydrating them during games. So when they'd walk the boundary, you'd always see the Essendon players hydrating with, Powerade and all these sort of things to have them ready for max effort. So I became quite scientific, I suppose, in the application of recovery for the players. But I've always had the philosophy of just keep it simple, stupid. You don't have to make it out that you're some great intelligence. Just break it down into its most simplistic, usable form for people to engage, and then they'll embrace it. And the players did. I gave them the facts about this is why we're doing it. This is why you're walking the boundary. It's going to break down lactic acid. This is when I give you a drink. Don't say no. I'm not asking you, do you want one? I'm telling you to drink the bloody stuff. So drink it, and we're going to weigh you after. It's not an optional. You're doing it. And the players bought into that, and the coaching staff bought into that. Don't forget also, like Kevin Sheedy might have been the head coach, but he had fabulous assistant coaches led by Rob Shaw, a Tasmanian, who I also had an instant rapport because I've been at the Tasmanian Institute of Sport. So those sort of things really played into changing the culture of sports science and conditioning at Essendon Football Club, and that permeated other clubs because you tend to follow the leader a bit. If they're doing it, we have to do that too. That's human nature.
Yeah. Yeah, Loris, when he was on the podcast, mentioned West Coast, Geelong and Essendon. You three were sort of pioneers in a sense of the doing more explosive anaerobic based work rather than the steady state running.
I used to have the players down. So this is, they used to go on 10K runs, but I'd have them doing repeat sprints. So we'd go, and I taught them how to run properly. So they'd come down to the track there at Aberfeldy near Essendon, and we'd be doing all short explosive sprints like they were 60-metre runners. But then after our key training session, so on a Wednesday, they'd have to do rep 150s. So they'd run from point post to point post pretty much, and then they'd jog to the 50, and then they'd do the other one to the next point post, and on it would go. They were grueling sessions, but the players would never run off their feet because of them. We were a highly efficient anaerobic machine when they went into those games of 99, 2000, 2001. I think Essendon were doing things a little bit differently than the rest of the comp. It's now commonplace, and it should be, and it's now up to people that are in those roles to look for the new edge in terms of training and performance of where the future's going in terms of training.
Yeah, that's great. That's some great stories there. Thanks for sharing. Along that way, along your journey, and I know you're only really at the halfway point there. There's plenty more that you did after Essendon, but who were some strong influences on your career from
before I got to Essendon?
In terms of when you becoming an athletics coach as well, and just in general.
Yeah. So. Oh no, good question, because here I am in this country town, and so I really fed off the enthusiasm. I said the local butcher, and he became a very good friend of mine. His name was Don Parks, and he's still in the town of Yast and still involved in athletics. But Don's enthusiasm was infectious, and it was through Don I started reading more and more. I'm working at the hospital, but I'm reading books, and I was always a fan of what young athlete at the time, or even anyone in the world. You speak to any kid in the world right now, and they all know who Usain Bolt is. They can tell you who Usain Bolt. Well, when I was a kid, my Usain Bolt was a superstar called Carl Lewis, and I looked at everything Carl Lewis did. And when you look at Carl Lewis, even compared to Usain Bolt, technically he's a better runner than Usain Bolt. He's just not quite as fast, but his technique is like second to none. And so my very first influence was looking at Carl Lewis, the athlete, but who coaches him? And it was a guy called Tom Tellez, who's world famous in track and field circles. And I just devoured everything I could find of what Tom Tellez said. So I haven't met Tom Tellez, but I know a hell of a lot about Tom Tellez and what his philosophies were. So that influenced me. I told you that I was working for the athletics club at Yass and doing those things. Well, this guy came to town doing his coaching, and his name was Tony Rice. And Tony Rice went on to be one of the national coaching conveners and involved with coach education. He's also had a big impact on my career. And of course, when I went to Little Athletics, the boss there, he was almost like a zealot for taking the sport to the masses. And like I said to you earlier, I used to travel about 140,000 kilometres every year, travelling around the state, and it was driven by it was almost like a missionary zeal. And Peter Sheedy was the boss of Little Athletics in New South Wales, and he and I just got on. I just shared his vision, and I still do, and I still look at, well, how can we make that better? And it's not about having people come to the sport. How can you take the sport to them? How can we make it more accessible to them? And it's about what you can do and what you can give to the community. That's what was important, and it still is important. And I only had this conversation with Bendiria Boyer about 2 weeks ago, and when I heard Peter Sheedy's voice as I said it. I said to Bendiri, whenever a young kid comes to you for an autograph, never turn away. Always spend time with that young kid. They could be a superstar of the future, and you spending 30 seconds of your life might change their lifetime. And she embraces that. So Bendiri will always spend time with the kids and talk to them about what she's doing. That was the influence of Peter Sheedy, now coming into a whole new generation of high-performance athletes in this country. I went from there and I ended up at the Institute of Sport, and rest his soul, Peter Bowman, he was in charge of track and field. And I was the young punk. I was only 26 when I started at the Institute. And I'm sure a lot of people, I'm absolutely positive, particularly people in Tasmania, would have thought, what the hell? Who's this guy coming in trying to tell us what to do? I didn't have support of Peter Bowman. I had 120% backing. Everything I needed was provided by Peter Bowman. Just go and do it, mate. You run the program as you want. I don't think I could have developed without someone like that behind me, and the zealot-like enthusiasm that I had brought in from Peter Sheedy. And then I met people whilst I was working for the Institute, and been very close friends with him to this day. And he's one of the national throws coaches, but the process is still the same. But Peter Taylor and I have become very good friends, and we used to share enthusiasm, the downs and the ups. And how could I answer your question now without mentioning probably the person who's had the greatest influence on me professionally and personally in my career, Kevin Sheedy. From the time I first met Sheeds, we just clicked, and like he's a nutcase, and he thinks so laterally, and I think laterally, and we're both nutters, and he'd think to the left and I think to the right, and we'd meet around the back. It was almost like it was meant to be. And, and now I try to involve other people in what I'm doing and encourage them on and mentor people and look to other people for guidance. Even to this day, I've been doing it. So, I'm sure I've left someone out of there, but there's been many, many people that have influenced me. And my greatest teachers are probably the athletes that I coach, to be honest.
With that connection that you had with Sheeds, and you guys had such great success, like would you say that connection and the fact that you guys clicked was one of the major, considering contributions to performance for the leaders of a club? How much do they need to click?
I think there was a combination of things when I first went to the Bombers. Again, I didn't know who any of the players were. I'd heard of James Hurd. But I honestly didn't really know any of them. And one of the first players to darken my door on my first day there was James Hurd. And not only did I recognise the name, he was also from Canberra, and he had a navicular stress fracture. And that's a running injury. So when he came in and said, "Oh yeah, I've got this navicular stress fracture," I almost thought to myself, "Oh, thank God, something I know." So little did I know, he'd already had, at that immediate point, he'd had 2 navicular stress fractures, and no one has ever really come back in a strong sense from that. This is going back, remember, 1999. But I said to Hurdy, look, yes, I know the navicular, just do this. And he went through exactly what I told him to do, and we got him back. it was one of the first games of the year. We got him back in 99 to play early on, and I think the game had only been going for about 20 minutes, and he did it again. And he knew it. He came to the bench, and he was on the bench in tears, and I just didn't know what to say. Here I was in this new role, and I've got one of the greatest players I'd learned from that time. He'd won the Brownlow, and he's sitting beside me, and he's in tears, and I knew that I was responsible for actually breaking him down. And this was the third time he'd done the navicular. No one's ever come back, in my understanding, from 3 navicular stress fractures. And the game ended, and he went back to his home, and I had to go over there. And he just said to me, "Mate, what do you want me to do?"
Yeah.
And I looked him in the eye, and I lied to him. I said, "I've got a few ideas, mate, but now's not the time to talk about them."
Yeah.
And he said, "Oh,
well played."
Okay. Oh, mate, I was racked with guilt. I went home and I didn't sleep a wink that night. And I just tossed and turned, and somewhere in the recesses of my memory bank, I'd been in Germany with an athletics squad over there. And when the athletes were, not training and stuff, I used to go off to the universities, or I'd go to the hospitals or whatever. And I met this guy over there. His name is Muller Wolfhard. And I met Muller, and he was talking about this new discovery they'd made to stimulate bone growth. So I contacted Muller Wolfhard. In those days, the internet wasn't like it is now. But anyway, I got hold of Muller, and he had this stuff called Osteoprotein 1. And anyway, cut the story short as I can, we organised for Therapeutics Goods Act, the TGA approval, brought the drug into Australia. We had to make sure it was covered by ASADA and all of those things. But Muller Wolfhard injected it into James Hurd's foot, and I did the rehab stuff over the course of the year and held my breath and started going to mass. And what do you know? He was up by the end of the year, and he was the captain of the team in 2000, and we never looked back. The fact that James Hurd got back into the game also underpinned my role within the game of AFL, because Hurd was a hopeless case, and I'd love to say that I was responsible for it, but really what I was responsible for was nearly ensuring the demise of one of the greatest players the game has seen. But thank God I'd spent some time listening and talking to people in Germany, and thanks to Muller Wolfhard and the surgeons, Julian Fellow in Melbourne, Hurdy got back and went on to have a continued illustrious career in the game. But it certainly established my trust among the coaches, and throughout the AFL code, and Essendon's success didn't do me any harm either.
Yeah. Wow, what a story. I haven't heard that one before. That's amazing. Bombers fans,
I reckon I've got a few other stories up my sleeve for you.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. There'd be a few developing footballers watching. What would be? I know one's asked a question, which this may cover it, but he's written biggest thing you look for in a good player. So if we reframe that into developing players, what do you try and look for, and how do you know that guy's going somewhere, or does it vary too much?
Oh, no, it doesn't vary. I think you look for the underlying things. You can't coach attitude, and you look for how hungry are they, and despite setbacks that they have, how eager are they to push through. We just talked about James Hurd. None of that would have been possible without his overwhelming enthusiasm to get the job done. You're not just elite in outcome, you're elite in action, and action's how you prepare and what you do to get there. You can't be a part-time elite athlete. You are either in or you're not. So I look for that mindset within the individual. When a player comes to me, and this can apply to any sport, whether they're a track athlete or a footballer, I've worked with a lot of different sports, and it's the same basis. I look at what the individual offers and where can we improve that. In most young players, so if you're a 16, 17-year-old and you're listening to this now, don't worry about how much you can bench press or how much you can squat. What's your posture like? Let's get your posture correct. Your mother or your grandmother nagging you about sitting up straight, that's a clue, that you've got hunched shoulders. And if you're hunched over, you're not going to be able to bench properly. You're not going to be able to squat properly. So get the body properly balanced, front, back, upper, lower. develop the athletic movement, not just in terms of running, but also how they move in the gym and how they lift. And then look at things as simple as mobility. What's your mobility like? And what are your recovery strategies like? Don't talk to me about you dream of being an elite athlete as you, eat your Mars bar and wash it down with a bottle of Coke. If your diet's crap, don't look for supplements. I've got to have whey protein isolate because I read that that's what the athletes do. As you then go down and your supplements, Mars bars and Coke, for example, you're kidding yourself. So get all of the small details sorted out. And I look for that for the young athletes that I'm working with and make sure that they're empowered with knowledge in terms of what they have to do, when they have to do it, and keep reinforcing that. So it's the life you lead, the actions that you pursue, but also get the fundamentals in place. And for me, the fundamentals are posture, movement, and mobility.
Fantastic. That's great. That's packed with gems there for those listening, young footballers and even current. I'm just sitting now, keep my chest up.
Yeah. Oh, I'm watching you.
Yeah.
Look, it can be a bit of an affliction, what was that movie where the guy saw dead people, and he didn't realise he was dead himself and he could see dead people. I feel a little bit like that sometimes, where I'm walking on the street and someone will be in front of me and I'm analysing, you poor bugger, you've got a bit of degeneration of your left hip there. Or there's something wrong with your knee. Oh, you've really got to get that neck looked at. So it's just a movement, and you can see what they have to do in terms of there's the pathology, that's the symptom, what's the cause, let's work through that. And so that's what I do for a living, and I've done it now for a while, and I love doing that. And when you see the result and people improve just by making those fundamental changes really to their movement pattern or even their postural alignment, it's very rewarding for them and for me.
How about the same sort of question for developing staff that want to, aspiring coaches? What do you look for, and what do you develop with people that you've mentored along the way?
Oh, look, this is probably inappropriate, but you wouldn't trust a fat dietitian. So I think that your staff have to live the life that they want the players to be, and that's discipline and control and enthusiasm, and they're the drivers of knowledge. So they should be pushing as much information as they can to the athlete. Now, if you've got young staff coming through, well, fill them with knowledge, push the knowledge to them of what you want, give them a role and give them a goal of what you want to have. One of the things I really love is mentoring, and I mentor in a private school now in Sydney, but I'm also mentoring at university. And it's about empowering those people to go out and bring the answers back for me. Let them take you on a journey of discovery. And there's so much that we don't know. Don't be limited by things that you've done in the past. Look to the way things can be. And by giving that role over to a young, enthusiastic person, that's only going to improve you as a coach anyway. So I think that's vital if you're going to stay relevant as a coach.
Yeah, fantastic. There's another question come through from James. Did you find that your lack of familiarity in the AFL initially made it difficult to achieve buy-in from footy players? Was that overcome by building relationships?
No, really, really good question, James. I think it was honesty at the beginning. I remember standing up in front of the players and I just said to them, I've got no idea about football, but what I do know about is how to get the best out of people. And in fact, I actually told them that my exact words to the Bombers were, some of the most influential people in history have been short in stature. And the one that springs to mind is Hitler. And what you're going to find is that my short stature, I've got more in common with Hitler than just our lack of height. And it took the smile off their face. They knew they were in for it. But it came to that I told the players I didn't know about football, but I knew about getting people fit. I knew about getting them strong, and I knew the challenges of their game, and that I would back them in 100%, but they needed to come with me. And it wasn't, you couldn't just talk to them about that. But when pre-season started, it had a very different feel for them. in terms of the explosivity and movement. And I was quite big on their body composition. And we honed in on things like their summer skin folds, and how heavy they could be, what was the ideal mass. I honed in on what their explosivity needed to be like in terms of how fast they had to run 5 and 10 metres in. I honed in on their explosivity to be able to jump onto a box, to repeat effort. And we looked at charts, and I was able to give each individual player a summary of what they needed. I also spent time sitting down with every player on the list from the very beginning and just asking them questions like, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? And I think the two most empowering questions for me as a coach that I ask, and I do a lot, is I ask an athlete, and I'm talking AFL players as athletes, but I can be talking swimmers or hockey players, or I can be talking a young kid at school. Who do you most admire? And who do you most dislike? And when they tell me who they most admire, they'll rattle off, and I'll say, why? And they'll tell me why they most admire that person. And then when you ask them who they most dislike, they'll tell you. And what invariably comes out there is the truth of what they aspire to be. The person that they admire has qualities that they either see that they possess or that they want to hone and develop within themselves. So that tells you what their goals are. And when you ask them who they most dislike, that person invariably has some component within them that they fear within themselves. And that's what can motivate them. You motivate them through the fear of what they don't want to become. And you hone in on those, and you structure your program up around those. Mate, coaching is actually really simple. Working with people is what's difficult. Regardless of the sport, you're an AFL coach. That's fantastic. But you're not coaching AFL. You're coaching people. And what I want to do is I want to coach the person first and the player second, or coach the person and the athlete second. And the athlete comes out if you find the person within there, what motivates them, what drives them to be ultimately successful. Your role as the coach is to put the stepping stones in place to allow the realization of that. It's not rocket science. It's listening to people and building the pathway.
It just seems like the things that you were doing back then are what a real focus is now in elite sport. Like I know at Hawthorn, the 2 years I was there with just 2018, 2019, the people first was a huge philosophy, and the anaerobic side of the game, opposed to steady state running.
Yeah, well, the people first one, it's easy to say, but you've got to be able to do that. And it's easy to do that when you're winning. It's when you're not performing that well that the true essence of that culture comes up. People look at winning clubs for the culture. That's fantastic. I understand that, and that's logical. When I was traveling around the world, I didn't go to some deadbeat club. I was going to the biggest clubs in the world to see if I could find a trend or a trait that they had. But at the same time, it's when those successful clubs find themselves in hard times, how well do they bounce back from that, and how well do they rebuild? How real is the culture, or is it just some perception that's great for media? And again, you just look within your club for those people that drive your culture. And if you're the leader, do you live the culture?
Yeah, and that's something you mentioned before with staff. You got to live it. Like you said, you're not going to trust a fat dietitian. I love that one. I think I've heard Paul Check say that before as well.
No, I've been a fan of Paul Check for a long time, but I've never heard him say that. But I thought I'll probably get sued by all these dietitians. But I used to have issues with dietitians. Actually, I've only ever sacked 2 people in my life, and they've both been dietitians. I just thought that they just do the old mantra of nutrition, and what they've been taught. I understand that, and respect that. They've got a huge role. But I did a third degree. I did a postgrad in nutrition because I wanted to see, well, what am I missing here? There's something I've got to be missing. So I went to Deakin University to do postgrad in nutrition. And look, it's a very complex area, and I still think it's an area that we don't know enough about. We think we do, but I think we're beholden to the multinationals that have their own agenda called profit. Yeah. And, we convince ourselves that this is the way to go and a healthy future. it's really interesting. I'm coaching track, as you know, and in my squad at the moment, I've got 3 refugees. They're Africans, and the 2 guys that I've got, you would not find better specimens. They're absolutely ripped. And, you know, the thought of them having a sugary drink or a treat of an ice cream or anything like that is just so foreign to them that they wouldn't do that. And their diet is so simple in terms of what they eat and making sure that they've recovered for the next session. You know, I think sometimes you've got to look back to what we did well rather than looking forward for the latest trend or the latest supplement or whatever. It's in your basics. And like I alluded to before, you can take all the supplements you like. If your diet's crap, all your supplementing is crap. Yeah. And, we've got to get the basics right.
Yeah.
That's what I learned from doing nutrition.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, good lesson. Good learning. It reminds me, I think it was Matt O'Neill, an Australian nutritionist, said, if your grandma doesn't know it, don't eat it. It's,
very good. Actually,
it's a good one.
I'm showing my age, but I went to university. That first degree I did in coaching and physiology, I did with Matt O'Neill.
Yeah? Yeah, I did.
Yes. So we go well back. Yeah, no, he's very, very good. And, he was quite astute even back in those early days.
Yeah. It's, there you go. Small world. That just reminded me of it. There you go. I didn't know that there was maybe you got him. Maybe that was, he stole that one from you.
Oh, who'd know? Well, I was probably the old boy in those days. I was, 25 when I was at university. So he was only a spring chicken in those days, doing this, degree in sports coaching. You know, back then we didn't know where we'd end up, but it was a very successful cohort, that one, actually. There's probably a dozen of us that went off into major roles in different sports all around the world. Very, very successful course that was. And that's one of them.
And so you went on to GWS. How did that work with Kevin Sheedy? Was he still at Essendon, or did you guys go to GWS together, or he came on?
No, you skipped a bit of a time there. I'd been at Essendon for 9 years when Sheeds left, and Matthew Knights came in as the coach. And Matthew Knights had a different view on how football should be. And he and I didn't really see eye to eye on a lot of things. And I think really 10 years was long enough. It was more than time for me to move on. And after 10 years there, I pulled the pin, but no one put up much of a fight for me to go. And it was enough. So I left the Bombers at the end of 2008, and then I set up my own business. So I started working at Olympic Park Sports Medicine in Melbourne, and I was working there, one of the first clinical exercise physiologists in that sort of environment, and that was going pretty well. And I actually went over to the dark side. I started doing some work with the arch enemy of Carlton, and I was working with players like Andrew Carazzo, and I had the great privilege of working with Chris Judd. So I worked with Juddy for a course of a year, working through things like speed and agility and so on. And the AFL were terrific also. The AFL got me involved with their International Rules Series. So I was involved with that for a couple of years, and went to Ireland with the International Rules team. And they were great experience and great exposure to the very best players across all the clubs. So I love doing that. And the AFL have been a fabulous organisation to me. Like, they've stood by me through thick and thin. I continued on. I then got a tap on the shoulder. Would I be interested in doing some stuff? Oh, it was actually even when I was at Essendon, where you had Graham Arnold, who was the coach of the Socceroos. He came to Essendon to find out what we were doing and so on, and ended up doing some work with Arnie and travelled with the Socceroos to Kuwait and Bahrain and did work with them. And that was at the halcyon days of soccer. You know, guys like Harry Kuehl and Viduka and the like. And that was a bit of an eye-opener for me in many respects, because I really thought that they were behind what we were doing in AFL at the highest levels of soccer. They weren't embracing some of the sports science and things we were doing. That's what Graham Arnold was trying to bring into the Socceroos, and they really did that. They subsequently put on Darren Burgess, and Darren Burgess took soccer to a different level, I believe, in this country. And of course, now he contributes quite significantly in AFL. And then I went to another sport that I actually didn't really like much. One of my other great mates, along with Matt O'Neill at Uni of New South Wales, was a guy called Jock Campbell. And Jock Campbell went on to become the head of performance at the Australian Cricket. And he got involved with the Indian Cricket League, the ICL, which was a rebel thing for the IPL. And he convinced me that it'd be a great opportunity to go to India for cricket. Well, I've hated cricket since I was a young kid, getting abused at Yass for not concentrating while the cricket was on. I never played cricket in Yass. I went swimming. But yeah, so then I find myself on the subcontinent with part of the ICL, and I was with Bangladesh, and we travelled all over the subcontinent. It's one of the greatest experiences of my life doing that. And there's probably not a fortnight goes by, even some decade later, that I don't hear from one of the players from that team. In fact, I had a conversation with the captain of the team just today. And, so no, it was a fabulous experience going to India for the cricket. And so then when I came back, I was just working along, and I got a message from Andrew Demetriou that they were thinking of setting up a club in Western Sydney. And I'd spoken to Andrew on one of those international rules series that there should be a club in Western Sydney. And now, if we go back to the very first part, if anyone's still awake, I said that I grew up in Yass near Canberra. The Giants' footprint was going to be based with Canberra. My family, my grandparents were from Blacktown, which is where the initial Giants were going to be. Right. I travelled 140,000 kilometres over New South Wales, most of it west. I knew every part of New South Wales. I knew it better than anybody else involved with the Giants when they were setting it up. I was almost destined to be involved with the establishment of a team in Western Sydney that was going to embrace that part of New South Wales. And I'd already accepted the job before I realised that Kevin Sheedy was there. But I was rapt to team up with Sheeds. And it was almost like going back to the very beginning, like going back with Peter Shinnick to sell the game of AFL to kids who didn't even know how to spell AFL. And here I am out there doing it again and getting them involved. And look, it was great. And well, it was. And then that led to all sorts of different things. So I got an alignment set up with University of Western Sydney, and I've got funding for 2 PhD students to come in and convince the board that it was a great idea to spend $30,000 on these glasses. They look like sunglasses, but what they do is they measure the movement of your eyes, and through the measurement of your eyes, it can determine whether you've got good decision making, average decision making, or poor decision making. So kids who couldn't care less about AFL, we'd go into their school and do this testing with kids to test their speed, test their endurance, test their mobility, but more importantly, test their aptitude for the game of AFL with decision-making glasses. And we were putting them on those. Mate, that was fascinating study. And those papers are about to be published now. So anyone who's in AFL, get out there now and have a look. The 2 students that I was part of the supervising team for, a young girl, Muslim faith, and that was breaking new territory too for AFL, having a Muslim girl playing AFL. So Lael Kassim came in, and so she's soon to be Dr. Lael Kassim. And another young guy who was already qualified as a podiatrist. Oh, Lael, by the way, was a physio. And Andrew Sharp came in. So soon to be Dr. Andrew Sharp came in as one of the students as well, and did these fascinating studies. And I think it's still going to come through, but that will change the way we recruit players in the AFL. And I believe there's the essence where we'll be able to safely determine whether a player's actually concussed or not, because you could actually look at their pre-head knock footage, look at what their decision or their eye movement patterns were, and then compare that if they've come to the bench. So the days of making an educated guess or holding up 2 fingers or asking them how they got to the ground, that's gone. I think that what we've been doing at the Giants, or what we were doing back then, that'll lay the foundation for the future of concussion diagnosis and return to play protocols. That's to come. So that's very exciting for the AFL. And I think it's something that the AFL should be very proud of, because it's going to change that technology worldwide.
Yeah. So that's they created the glasses themselves. This is an Australian invention, or it's been
no. The glasses came about actually to determine something completely different, and it was to do with brain tumours and to do with the impact on vision in hospital. And there was a point when I was at the Giants. I'd only been there for a few years, going along pretty well, and I started acting quite strangely, missing going to meetings and so on. And it came to a bit of a head, or actually came to a head, when Gubby Allen, who was our footy manager, he's a fabulous guy. He's one of the best I've worked with, by the way. But Gubby, he rang me to say, mate, you meant to be at a meeting. And I said, oh, yes, sorry, I've been caught up. I had a meeting with Sheeds. We've just been discussing, selection, and look, I'm on my way. And he going, oh, all right, well, come and see me when you get here, mate. So that was probably a good story. The only problem was Sheeds hadn't been at the club for over a year. And, I was totally off my head. I didn't know what was going on. Anyway, it turned out Gubby got me sent in to get checked, and I had an autoimmune disease which had attacked my brain, and it's called limbic encephalitis. And anyway, that deteriorated quite quickly from there, and I spent almost a year in hospital and in a care situation. And the prognosis initially wasn't very good, because I'd had a number of seizures that I'd kept from people, and they'd left with lesions on my brain, and there were 7 of them. And the reality was that for each one of those lesions, it had a 90% chance of becoming an inoperable brain tumour. And mine, thank God, didn't. But one of them impacted on the vision in my right eye. And so these glasses they were putting on me to track how much the seizures had impacted on my eye, and whether I was actually going to lose vision in that eye, and how bad the damage was. So while they were talking about my eye, I was thinking, could we use this to identify movement for tracking a football, or identifying a relay baton coming into the hand as you exchange at top speed? And so, that's seriously how that came about. And I chased up the glasses from that. So their foundation was in medical, but I found a use for them. And what I'd love to do now is expand that study into athletics, particularly for the 4x1, and look, we could actually see, imagine having those glasses on an athlete at the Olympic Games in Tokyo as they come into the exchange zone, and you can actually see them pushing the baton into the hand. I mean, it takes realism of television into a whole new spectrum. So we're looking at that. And the other thing that grew from that, I know I'm waffling, but the other thing that grew from that is I believe that we can move that, because now we've got patterns of movement that we can see. And I think the future is going to be in holograms, and a little bit like the old movies back in the 70s of Star Wars, where they had the holographic imagery of Princess Leia delivering the message to the robot. I think that will be with players, and soon it won't be a case of Toby Green from the Giants playing on Dylan Shield at Essendon. You're going to have the hologram of Dylan Shield and his most favoured aggressive play, and how do we shut down that holographic image by moving here and there? I know that's out there, but stay tuned. I reckon that's coming, and it's born from the visual search patterns and all the data that we're getting in from player movement on ground. Put them together, and the hologram stuff is not that far away.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Wow, that's that's super interesting.
I didn't know we'd be talking about that tonight, but now you're starting to get inside my weird brain.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for letting us in and sharing. That's fantastic. I've never heard anything like it before, but it makes a lot of sense. I mean, what's coming next? Like GPS is old now, so there's got to be something.
I think the other area that's coming very fast is the GPS. We'll laugh about the GPS soon. I mean, nanotechnology is something that's becoming more and more. And nanotechnology is where you can take something that's so big and make it small that it's so microscopic. So imagine we put the nanotechnology into a thread of fibre of a compression garment, that just that thread going across your chest can measure your sweat rate, your heart rate, your impact on your game, the pattern of where you've run. And all they've got to do is put on their jumper. It'll all be measured within the jumper. We could nearly do that now. And I think that'll come in too. So that will also lend itself to what we know are the actual visual search of players. I talked about Toby Green. I think Toby Green's one of the most exciting players that I've worked with since working with a player like James Hurd.
Yeah.
And having a Toby Green, we've got all his visual footage. We know how he looks, where he looks, and so on. We just apply that to what you're trying to do in your holographic image. You start to build the absolute prototype of what you want for excellence in decision making for a footballer. Can you coach that? Can you train that? I don't know. At the end of the day, some people think they're God. You can't, we can't create talent. You can just develop the talent. But if you've at least got a benchmark and a map, a guide map, well, then you can take your creationist theory a little bit closer.
Yeah, and maybe fast track it. Yeah. And
I think so. But you've got to understand it. Yeah, you've got to understand what's at the basis of that. And, you've got to respect the past by looking back at, well, this works well. You've also got to be looking forward to where is this going to? Where can this take me? And it's infinite. There's no limit. Only your ability to see it. And if you can open your eyes to what's possible, then you start moving towards that.
Yeah,
that's an exciting thing.
It is.
That's exciting.
It is, yeah, super exciting, and it's my last question actually. What are you excited about for 2021? It sounds like this article or this research.
The research stuff is that's sort of been the excitement for a few years. But in a way, I'm still involved with football, and I still work with individuals within AFL, whether it's through the clinic in Melbourne or sometimes up here in Sydney. I do a lot of work with individual soccer players, so I've got that. But I'm spending 20 plus hours a week with a very elite squad of athletes. It's the best squad I've ever had, and
wow.
their ability to perform, it's just stretching my own limitations in terms of a coach to how do I get them to the next level. So we've got nationals here in Sydney in just over a week. And so my group are now coming in terms of our peaking plan. They're starting to come together. But I've the main athlete I've got in my squad, as I've spoken about already, she's the most exciting talent that we've had in this country since Kathy Freeman. She's similar sort of level of Kathy at that age. But I think the future's very bright for Australian track and field. We've got some good athletes coming through. And I'm beyond excited about being involved with the group of athletes that I've got in not just letting them or helping them find their own limits as an athlete, but also helping to develop them as people and what they're capable of putting back in to the sport. And I just stay tuned. It's exciting, and looking forward to what's coming, not just in 2021, but beyond that. I mean, we're already talking about 2024. And if you don't know, the Olympics are in Paris that year. So we're looking at that already. But we've got to get this one out of the way in Tokyo first. And there's so many things that are going to come over the next few years. I'm rapt to be here to be part of it.
Fantastic. Well, you've captivated all 18. I've noticed no one has logged on, a new person for the last half an hour, but all 18 have stayed on.
That's good.
Which is the longest.
They might have gone to sleep, mate.
Yeah, Mark McGrath, you might have tipped him, I reckon. This might be the longest podcast to date. You've got the longest there, and also you're at the moment. This is the 40th episode, but you've definitely been the biggest name drop to the point where I just had to Facebook message you. We have to get John Quinn on.
Good.
So,
all good. My pleasure, mate.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone that watches this live, as well as the future people that watch it when it's a podcast. The recording, really cherish the gems you've dropped throughout the last hour and a bit. So thank you so much for your time, your experience, and all the stories, John. Really appreciate it, mate.
Well, my pleasure. And if I can finish by saying that if I've said something here that may have captured the imagination of someone, or they want to know more information, please just go to my website. And I don't mean as a promotion for me, but if you just go to Quinn Elite Sports Services, my mobile phone is there and my direct email's there. Any questions you've got, or there's something that you think I may have that can help you. I don't believe in secrets. There's no secrets in coaching. And if people tell you there are, what they're doing is saying they're very insecure with what they're doing. So I don't believe in secrets. If I've got it, you can have it. So if I've said something and you think you'd like to expand on it, just send me an email. Make sure you tell me that you heard me on this podcast, and I'll turn it around just as quick as I can.
Fantastic. Yeah. That's great, John. Thank you so much, mate. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Great talking with you, and all the very best with your future podcasts.
Beautiful. Cheers, John. I'm sure we'll catch
up.
Bye
for now.
Cheers. Bye for now.
Bye for now.
Catch up. Well, thank you for listening, everyone. Make sure if you enjoyed the episode to follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our website, PrepareLikeAPro.com, where you'll join over 1,000 footballers and you'll receive a free strength and conditioning program, as well as high performance presentations from our coaches. If you want to work with one of our coaches at Prepare Like a Pro, either one-on-one if you're based in Victoria or on our online program, direct message us on Instagram or send us an email at support@preparelikeapro.com. But once again, thanks for listening and thanks for the questions for those that sent it in. All the best. Cheers, guys.